The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our show for another week here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church, and joined with the Reverend Robert Cornegie from Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, associate pastor there, and also Pastor Reverend Carl Zorowski from St. Peter's United Methodist Church. And joining us today for the first time, too, and he's been on our Coastal Daybreak show before, is Dr. Robert Wilson, who is a scientist and author of the book called Nullifying God, and was recently a participant in an apologetics conference over at Chapel by the Sea. Bob, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here today.
And Robert will give you the appropriate hazing as we continue on to this.
It's my job, and I'm happy to do it.
Yes, he is, but he's been hazing me for years. So,
and he's good at it.
yeah, he is good.
right.
There's no question about it.
Yeah,
It's a gift. What can I say?
so far, no charges have been filed on that one. But speaking of which, let's start into something that is interesting because it has not got into the legal realm of charges yet, except for the allegations of sexual impropriety among now multiple people. We see the ones who have kind of led the headlines of recently until just the day before that we're recording this. Charlie Rose now from CBS and PBS now in this mixed in this as well. But I want to start out with an article actually from the News and Observer that came out late last week, and it's called NC Evangelicals Taking Sides Over Roy Moore and Al Franken. Martha Quinlan writing from the News and Observer on this one. He says, on the same day that Franklin Graham voiced support for Roy Moore, other North Carolina evangelicals were criticizing the Alabama Republican U.S. Senate candidate and those who would support him in face of multiple claims that Moore assaulted or harassed teenage girls. He talks about, the article goes on to talk about Franklin Graham still giving his support to Moore. He actually says, though, something that has some room to move in this. He says, my prayer is that the truth will ultimately be revealed and lies will be seen for what they are. Later on, it talks about Daniel Aiken, president of the conservative Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, took to Twitter to say that he was, again, thankful for the brave and courageous women coming forward and calling out their sexual abusers. Shame on anyone who would defend these predators and minimize their actions. Robert, we've kind of been down this road, certainly on the last election cycle, where we're talking about evangelicals and people that may not hold up the highest moral authority. And where do we go in terms of the comment on that?
Yeah, this is a sad commentary on the state of politics, isn't it? And the state and moral politics, because all politics eventually get down to a moral question. And so you just can't avoid it. It eventually is going to get there. But again, politics is not always a moral enterprise itself. No. I mean, we know very well, dirty tricks that take place. And so it's really hard in this kind of culture that we're in now, the way our culture has developed, to be able to tease these things. Because so often it's not the accuracy of the accusation, it's the seriousness of the accusation that is the thing that you deal with. And so that's what we're dealing with as a culture, isn't it? You know, because accusations and on sexual impropriety particularly are starting to fly in all areas. I mean, it kind of began in the television, cable news area, Fox, and it sort of has exploded. I mean, of course, in this current iteration. I mean, there have always been previous iterations, but in this particular iteration, in this particular political atmosphere, it kind of began there, and then it's kind of exploded out from there, and it's gone into not just media, but into entertainment, and it's gone into
Hollywood.
Hollywood. It's everywhere, and so we're seeing it stretch into everything. Look, Roy is is a controversial guy. I mean, the first time I ever heard his name, it was controversial.
Well, yeah, we've spoken about him before because he wanted to have the granite monument, to the Ten Commandments in front of the courthouse, and
that's exactly right. So he is he's like a lightning rod for this stuff. And so when an accusation is made like this, and look, I am not downplaying the accusation whatsoever. There's an adage that says you can make an accusation or made without evidence should be rejected without evidence. Now, we do have evidence. And so what the problem is, like you said, this is pre-adjudication. It hadn't gone into the legal system yet. Mm-hmm. But those accusations have to be proved. But what has happened in the process is he's being judged based on just the accusations rather than, there's some evidence, but it's really, really difficult to sort this one out.
But this is where, Carl and Bob, this is where we also have struggled over ideas of sexual, I want to say crimes, but indiscretions. Is that there are people who are claiming to be victims there that we give a different level of rights to. We also, when we talk about innocent until proven guilty, well, Bob, it's a little different here sometimes.
Well, the thing is, you're talking about salacious accusations in the first place. And the problem with allegations like that, is that once they're made, they can't be washed off. This is not a court of law. Once a reputation is attacked, how do you regain that reputation? And how do you prove a negative that these things actually did not occur? One of the things in my talk, and Robert heard this, is that I bring up the definition of what is called direct evidence. And that is evidence that is used to say whether somebody is guilty or not. Is there enough there to say that they are actually, in fact, guilty? And the deal is, direct evidence is that evidence which is so clear, so tangible, so convincing that you don't need to use reason to make it, to validate it.
It's obvious on his face.
Yeah, it's so obvious on his face, it's like somebody walking up, slapping on the face, and it's that much. But the problem in Roy Moore's case is that we're talking about the fact that these allegations have been made. They were made by young people or people who were supposedly 14
to 16
right,
years old.
In that era. And that just horrifies. And because Moore is a lightning rod, because Moore, when he put up those 10 Commandments, all of a sudden painted a target on his back, people have been wanting to get rid of him. He is in a difficult position because even if he is cleared of these charges, that smear, that aura is still going to maintain around him. And that's the thing that, frankly, bothers the daylights out of me, because on the plus side, from everything I've been able to find out about Moore, if he got in there, he would raise a ruckus. He would challenge the establishment, so to speak. He would try to get things done that were right.
Here's where we also have that intersection that we talk about all the time here, the intersection of faith and politics, because the Boston Globe put out an editorial piece just a week ago or so, or no, actually just a day ago. So I didn't send this out to you guys, but it says why evangelicals are again backing a Republican despite allegations of sexual misconduct. We have to remember this is vote number 51. On the Republican side in the Senate. This is are you going to get these, or are you going to support somebody? We went through this with what we called the amoral election in 2016. Are we going to do this? Are evangelicals going to support somebody holding their nose all the way through, just so they can keep that slim majority for whatever it's worth?
Well, people who have listened to this show know that one of the things I keep coming back to over and over is the value of an individual. And if you are looking at this situation with more as, well, we need him because we need that extra vote, we don't care what he's done, well, then that completely dismisses the value of anyone with an accusation against him.
That's right.
Okay. If those accusations are true, then Moore is a very bad person. If the accusations are not true, then those people making them are bad people. We don't know. We don't know who's telling the truth, okay, because it hasn't gone to court. It hasn't gone through trial or anything. But it comes down to this. Sexual assault on somebody is an abuse of power. Okay, you are claiming that you have power over that individual, and their only value in that moment is to serve your purpose. And you don't care about them as a person. You just care about yourself. Okay. What do I think the story is with Moore? It's not really my place to say. Okay. But, we hear where there's smoke, there's fire. Yeah. Okay. I don't think things look very good for him. If what has been said about him is true, then no, I don't think that he needs to be the one making laws for the rest of the nation and telling everybody else how to live. When I turned on CBS News yesterday morning, I turned it on because I wanted to hear what they had to say about the death of Charles Manson. And lo and behold, Charlie Rose isn't there. And then later in the day, I found out. And I feel like I've been betrayed by Charlie Rose.
This is a topic that is not going away anytime soon, and it's something that we are probably going to be continuing to talk about, including where do we go from this now? Where do we go and perhaps make a better world out of all this mess as well, too? And we come back, we'll have more to say on this in just a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy, Reverend Carl Żurawski, and Dr. Robert Wilson, as we talk about the allegations of sexual misconduct in various forms, and what does this mean for us and moving forward. And Robert, I know that when we ended that segment, you were ready to jump in with a little bit more.
Always, and
yeah, not unusual.
Well, this is one I've been thinking about, and how do we? And we've talked about it in previous shows where we've talked about this thing of. In fact, we talked about it at the Anglican Church in Virginia,
right?
And how they're taking down the Robert E. Lee and the George Washington plaques and all of that, and why. This transformational relationship we have with God. As evangelicals, as Christians, it doesn't matter whether you're evangelical or not, the root of our faith expresses this fact that we are sinners saved by grace.
Amen.
And faith, through faith. That who we were has been transformed by the power of God into who we are now in Christ. Not only do we have beliefs about who Christ is, we have actually had transformational experience, supernatural experience with him in the work of his Holy Spirit within us. So we are new creatures in Christ. And that's a powerful part of our testimony. When I teach people how to give a testimony, we go down into the nuts and bolts of what is the difference between who you were pre-Christ, your encounter with Christ, and then who you are becoming in Christ. And so, yeah, Dr. Bob, you have
I was going to say, but you said a very important word there, the word becoming. It is a continuing process.
That's exactly right.
I became a Christian 40 years ago, and I am not today the person that I was then, despite an incredible encounter with Christ that left me with tears for 2 weeks. But the thing is, we are becoming continually. I can see growth in myself from last year to this year, And so you say transformational and a process of becoming. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, but let me inject two things here. One is that with all these allegations that we're talking about, whether it's Russell Moore, we go back to Harvey Weinstein, we go back to Russell Simmons, who started Def Jam Records, is one of these is accused. You have now John Conyers talking about having a slush fund before, and just to go on, Charlie Rose. I haven't heard any of these talking about how, well, that's who I was then, and that's not who I am today.
Well,
and isn't that interesting though that I'm kind of surprised at that. I'm kind of surprised that we haven't had, because I could speak to my own story there and say, oh, you're going to have to throw me in with that bunch too if you want to take me back to my days when I was in my 20s and maybe even early 30s. You're going to have to take me back to that period as well too. But that's not who I am today.
Yeah, let me just finish my point, because that's absolutely true. And the point I'm making is that this was Judge Roy Moore claims to be a born again Christian. And so this is even if we discover that the accusations are false, let's just grant that for a moment. This is still a perfect teachable moment for a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, to be able to personalize. I mean, he has a platform now that is phenomenal to be able to talk about, yeah, I'm a different guy. There are things that God has delivered me from that I admit. And the only one that's really gotten close to it is Al Franken. And he said he was so sorry that he did that.
Right.
And that he was sorry he got caught is really kind of the way that usually works out. But as a believer, this is where the rubber meets the road. I'm a different person now than I was prior.
See, that transformation really cannot begin until we realize and accept that we're sinners. Okay?
Right.
When I can remember a time when I was about 40 when I got down on my knees in a church and I wept before God when I realized, everything I've ever done wrong, my life has been a sham. And it's all been against you. And I felt ashamed over the fact that I had alienated myself from God by the things that I had done wrong. And it wasn't until I felt that shame that I realized the value of the forgiveness that Christ offers. And, you've got to claim it. You've got to say, hey, I'm a sinner. And not just look at forgiveness from God as, well, okay, I did something wrong. I'll ask for forgiveness, get it checked off, and then I'll go out and I'll do it again. There's this transformation. You don't do it again. Why? Because you're becoming a different person. Right. That's what we call sanctification in the United Methodist Church.
That's
sure.
And ultimately, when we talk about sin, and this goes to the sexual sins that we've talked about in this show a lot, in many different stripes. Ultimately, we talked about that. The victim of this sin is the sinner, because they're the ones who have separated themselves from God. Mm-hmm. And so many other people are affected, and that they need to repent and try to make that right whenever possible. But ultimately, it's you've affronted God.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's where it begins. That's the vertical. Then it goes horizontal.
Right.
But you need Him to help you with the horizontal.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to let me just pose something for you to talk about. Is that going forward? Isn't this, we look at see how is God going to use tragedies often? Mm-hmm. How will we respond? How will God use this time or within us, and how will we respond to Him to glorify Him out of something? So how will we take all of this mess and use it to glorify God?
That's a heck of a good question. No, I'm serious. It is a good question, because the people who do not admit their sin, and when I say that, I don't mean a specific sin, but the fact that For somebody to say, for example, I am no different from Harvey Weinstein, I am no different from Roy Moore. You know, I realize I have a sin, and I can't take care of that myself. That is an enormous judgment that they have to make, because to admit that you are anything other than the person you think you are is really something else. It seems consistent, though, with the entirety of Scripture that there are people who don't want to admit that they are sinners.
Bingo.
Think of the Pharisees that surrounded the woman caught in adultery. I mean, Jesus called it exactly what they are. Okay, you guys, throw the first stone.
Right.
If you are free from sin. And they all kind of faded away. And the woman said, and he said to the woman, "You know the story, woman. There's no one left to condemn you." "No, sir, there's not." "Well, neither do I. But go and sin no more."
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. And this transformation from being a predator to a protector.
Yep, agreed.
This is really what we're talking about. And the culture, we have a predatory male culture. And that's the sin nature. It's me first, me more. And so being transformed from and I'm not saying just believers can do this. This can happen. You know, you can have an aha moment when you say, whoa, you know, I've been on that predatory track when it comes to women, or, you know, in this whole sexual context, whatever it is.
Sexualization of our society.
Yeah, exactly. So it's glorified really in our culture to be a successful predator. And really what God is calling us to be as men are protectors, you know, and that's a completely different shift of worldview, of understanding.
So is there an opportunity here?
I believe there is. And I think that conversation has to take place. And I think it has to take place in the churches, and it has to take place in our youth groups. It has to take, this has got to, you know, as it was once said, we need to nip it in the bud. You know, we need to get to this quick. Because, I mean, this is not anything that's sprung up in our generation only. This goes all the way back. And that shift from being predatory to protector is a huge shift. And as a society, I think, you know, we can actually use that term because people relate to that. They understand that kind of language.
And we see it as Christians, maybe it'll help us see humanity in the image of God.
Yes.
You know?
The value of every human life.
The value of every human life. And, you know, we talk about, especially in the United Methodist Church, we talk a lot about Christian perfection. You know, do you believe you will be made perfect in this life? And that Christian perfection is a complete love of God and a complete love of neighbor, which means love your neighbor as yourself. I'm not better than that person. Exactly. They are just as valuable and as important as I am. Okay, well, can I achieve that sense on my own? No. But we say, do you believe you can be made perfect? God will help us to get there. And that's part of that transformation, always moving towards that goal.
You know, we're talking about sexualization, and I think one of the things, and being protectors and being those predators. But I think one of the comments too is what Paul says. Help me, Ephesians. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Where is the focus on the husband? What is his role? What is the role of men?
Okay, we'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy, Reverend Carl Zarowski, and Dr. Bob Wilson is with us here today, too. And we want to talk about an article that's in The website Crux, C-R-U-X, Taking the Catholic Pulse is their subtitle for this. And it's about Catholic issues. And this was about a speech that Pope Francis recently made. And their view of the speech was a little different than the mainstream media view, so that's why I wanted to share with you. And the headline is, Pope Francis calls European physicians to morally withdraw from overzealous treatment. In it, he goes back to Pope Pius the 12th, talking back in 1957, talking about how there are many remedies that physicians can use, and that not necessarily meeting the ethical and humanistic standard that would later be called due proportion in the use of remedies. And so it was interesting that he went back to something that was 60 years ago to bring forward the idea that it is that overzealous treatment could be morally wrong, not to allow basically life to continue. Dr. Bob, let's start with you here on this one.
I'm the target here, right?
That's right. Well, as a former Catholic too, raised that way here, and seeing this, I think this is a very interesting position to take, and to say that basically let's let life take its course. Sometimes that just because we have the ability to exact many kinds of remedies that may not be really actually remedies, but just relief of particular circumstances, that doesn't mean we should.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I have been at bedside for a couple of deaths, and one of the things that strikes me is there's a point where you really need to discontinue treatment other than make a patient comfortable. If there is some hope that you can give them an extension of life, if that would be good for them, then that might be something to pursue. In any kind of cancer treatment, you get up into stage 4 where you have metastatic disease, and you keep going until there comes to be a point where you can't go any further. I was saying before we came back on the air how I watched my dad, who had prostate cancer. And one of the things prostate cancer does is to attack bones, particularly the spine, and it is exquisitely painful disease, horrible, horrible pain. There is no hope of Dad getting better, none whatsoever, not at that point. And there's no way you could give him more life. Hank, we're going to have a couple more years for you if we use this treatment. It's going to be pretty intensive, but we can give you that. There are cases where that would be useful, where that would be beneficial. Mm-hmm. And drawing that line is an extraordinarily difficult thing. You go back to diseases in children. I understand today that they're using gene therapy. I was reading an article last night about this, where they put in genes and a package in a virus that comes in and it clips the DNA exactly at the right point. It inserts the genes, and it allows these kids to have almost a normal life in many cases. Is it expensive? It is horrendously expensive. That's warranted. I mean, you're giving somebody life. Just to extend life is something almost you have to determine with the patient and at the bedside. And I'm not a medical person.
Well, we're going to look at a related article of that in our final segment here, too. Mm-hmm. But here, Carl, I know you noticed that Pope Francis uses some interesting language in this speech that he gave, too, about where life is not necessarily ending just because we ended in our mortal existence.
Right. He talks about death as being one of the steps of life, or maybe the final step of life, and that, of course, being the mortal life. And as Bob shared about having been at the bedside of a couple people who have died, as a pastor, I've been there myself, and death does not have to be a scary thing. I recently ministered to somebody who died one of the most beautiful deaths I've ever seen. I've never seen somebody go out with so much dignity, and I remember thinking, this is This is how God intends things to happen. But we can't fool ourselves. Death can be a very ugly thing as well. And the human inclination is to try to hang on to life. But, as the Pope is saying here, are we sometimes getting a little too overzealous and doing too much? And, even for the non-believers, they would understand this term. Sometimes we just need to let nature take its course. And you also can't have one rule that's going to work for every case. It's not a one-size-fits-all, because no two deaths are the same. No two people dealing with the same disease go through the same thing.
And Robert, one of the things that Pope Francis said here is that it thus makes it possible a decision that is morally qualified as withdrawal of overzealous treatment. Such a decision responsibly acknowledges the limitations of our mortality. Once it becomes clear that opposition to it is futile.
Yeah, and I think that's what Dr. Bob was talking about really precisely well, is that there are points at which the technologies, I've gone through very dear loved ones of mine with colon cancer and going into stage 4, diagnosis stage 4. My mother died of colon cancer. It went into her liver. My wife has colon cancer stage 4. It went into her lung. It's in her lungs. And so we're going through the difference between the two experiences. One was in the 80s and one is now. And the advancements in treatment are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And my mother, was often the kind of the guinea pig, as they were, and then of course we all are. They practice medicine, doctors do, so they're practicing on us. But some of the advances that were made were prior to, were because of what she went through. Some of the treatment. That's just the way it is. So we see this development, but there comes a point, as you so eloquently said, Dr. Bob, that where we have to say, thus far and no more. Mm-hmm. And it becomes then a ministry of presence and of trying to comfort that person as they go through this process, as they're getting ready to meet their Maker, and then as we're getting ready to lose someone very dear to us. And that encounter with the eternity, as believers, now I'm speaking specifically as believers here, we have a completely different worldview on this. And really, your belief about death is so critical to the way you're going to live your life, go through that process towards the end of your life. And if you don't get that
or
one
any
right,
stage of your life, really.
Yeah, if you don't get that one right, it can be horrific, or it can be one of the most beautiful deaths you've ever seen.
And when we talk on here about valuing life and valuing another person's life, well, we need to value the fact that death is a part of that life as well. And if we take on the attitude, well, we're going to do whatever we can to keep this person alive, regardless of the moral issues involved, the moral questions, then that's devaluing that person. But on the other hand, these advances that they're making are incredible. If I found myself nearing the end of my life and they came in and said, well, we can do this and it might work, I can't tell you whether or not I would tell them to do it.
It would all depend, I'm sure, as Pope Francis says, this is not the same as euthanasia.
No, that's right. And
it's not.
That's a critically important distinction we need.
Yes.
And he makes that distinction, doesn't he? The Pope does in his proclamation. And it's something that we really have to talk about. We're not talking about, ending life, as you said, Bob. These are extending life possibilities. And
right.
so
what he calls excessive treatments.
Yeah,
to
exactly
do that.
right.
Now, also, I think related to this, because we have this discussion when we talk about opioid epidemic as about people who do anything to relieve pain.
Right.
Is that maybe we also need to have a more ecclesiastical conversation about pain and what the role is there in life. Is that avoiding all pain is not also maybe not in God's plan.
You know, but most of my really profound cliches that I've collected over the years came from football coaches. And
you've used a few here.
I've used them. And one of my favorite ones is that one of no pain, no gain. And, you know, it's a cliche, but it's absolutely amazing how theologically true that is, that God uses the corrupted creation from sin to drive us into this incredible new creation that he is going to bring and restore all that corruption into just amazement to us. We can't, our minds can't fathom it. And so yeah, when we talk about pain, when we talk about how God uses it, it is remarkable how redemptive. That's why we call him the Redeemer. He redeems the pain. He redeems the suffering. And he uses it.
John's gospel talks about Jesus as being the light, and the light shines in the darkness has not overcome it. And sometimes when we are in pain and suffering, we are in a place of darkness. And sometimes it's in the darkness that the light shines the brightest.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I hope you'll stay with us. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 at AM 1240. And we're joined today, and for our first time with us is Dr. Robert Wilson, who's also the author of Nullifying God. And Dr. Bob, it's good to have you with us on this
Thank you so
program.
much, Ben. I appreciate it.
Hope it's been fun for you so far.
It has been a ball. I will come back here in a heartbeat, and of course, that means I got to be invited. So that's fine.
All right. Well, you may feel differently after we're done with this segment now. We'll see. But also, of course, Reverend Robert Cornigan and Reverend Carl Zarowski with us as well, too, as we want to talk about our final article today. Sometimes we call this segment the sign of the apocalypse. This may or may not exactly qualify, but this is from The Guardian article on genetics. It says scientists make first ever attempt at gene editing inside the body. New therapy will permanently alter DNA with no way to alter mistakes editing may cause, but offers chance to tackle currently incurable metabolic diseases. The article goes on to say about scientists have tried editing a gene inside the body for the first time in a bold attempt to tackle an incurable disease. The person is in California, is a 44-year-old Brian Madu, who intravenously received billions of copies of corrective gene and a genetic tool to cut his DNA in a precise spot. It's kind of humbling to be the first to test this, he says, as a metabolic disease called Hunter syndrome. Willing to take that risk, hopefully it'll help me and other people. Signs of whether it's working may come in a month. Tests will confirm in 3 months. If successful, new technique could give a major boost in a fledgling field of gene therapy. Well, Robert, why should this be of interest to theologians to talk about gene therapy here?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I tell you what, our knowledge of this is expanding really daily, isn't it? You know, as they're going through this process of trying to figure out. I mean, it hasn't been that long that we just mapped it. We got the genome mapped, you know, and now we're getting into DNA, and DNA is really the construct of creation. I mean, this is the information package. You know, they talk about the difference that it's a random act, evolution is a random act. I'm getting into your turf, Dr. Bob. But from a layman's point of view, although I do play an expert on the radio, but
And you stayed at a Holiday Inn.
Yeah, that's right. Night. But and the difference in perspective between that it just evolved under, you know, kind of naturalistic, unguided, and the ID, which is intelligent design, says there's actually intelligence behind all this, and the DNA is where that information is, and so now we're talking about going in and correcting the DNA, the book of information. You know, I mean, if I as a theologian, I mean, I don't know if this is even related to my interest in theology as much as it is just my interest in not messing up.
Yeah.
Because every science fiction movie I've ever seen,
Yes, all right.
there's some mutation, accidental mutation that takes place. I'll never forget when I saw The Fly.
Oh,
As a
yeah.
kid, and this mutation, and it stuck with me. So, yeah, I'm a little nervous about that, and I'll come up with some theological reasons if you want me to be nervous about it. But yeah, we need to proceed with caution, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that this really is new ground, and the financial benefit of this is going to drive what I fear may be some poor choices. So that's just my take on it.
Okay. Well, Dr. Bob is a scientist too. I mean, with every science advancement, there is a moral component. I mean, there's something we have to make some judgments over.
Well, I think my concern about this is that there are scientists out there, physicians, laboratory people, whatever, that don't have the highest moral issues in their mind. Could they take advantage of this? I mean, you look at all of the plastic surgeons out there today. There is an incredible place for plastic surgery. I mean, you've got a gash in your head, going to sew it up. Wonderful, no problem. But in this case, that is such a highly complex, editing genes is such a highly complex, highly sophisticated thing that I think it would be extraordinarily easy to mess it up. And to not quite get it exactly right, so that at some point down the line, the fallout of putting those genes in there, which are going to do their own thing, incorporate into DNA supposedly at exactly the right place, they could come out and do some really nasty things. And the question is, could that fallout be infectious? Could it go to other people? Could it cause... I mean, there's so many questions out there that this is one of these cases that it sounds great, wonderful, and if it works on the children that have Hunter's disease, I am
God bless
thrilled by
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
But at the same time, be very, very, very cautious.
What
and
door have we kicked open here?
Yeah,
So-
just be very careful of that. Is it a Pandora's box we opened?
Right.
Well, Ben, you asked about it from a theological point of view. When I read the article, I went down and one of the first things that popped into my mind was the phrase "playing God." Okay, here we are playing God, and I went down to the end of the article and started reading some of the comments that readers had made, and one of the very first ones was, "Look, folks, we are now trying to play God. This is not something we need to do." And the response to that comment was, well, if God had gotten it right the first time, we wouldn't have had to do it. So the thing is, when you try to talk about this from a theological point of view, you're going to get that kickback. If God created everything, why is it that we have these kind of things come up? Well, that's a discussion that we need to be able to respond to that and answer to that, where we talk about the world being a broken world, that the world is subject to disease and all of that because it is a fallen world, and it is no longer the good that God saw when he looked at creation. It doesn't all work the way he created it to. And so we have to deal with this. But then you look at, say, the first person that ever had a heart transplant. Okay,
right.
When that happened, I'm sure people were saying, "Well, we're playing God here. This is dangerous stuff."
It was.
But
Christian Bernard.
I
was-
remember
yes,
that.
but look at this.
Vividly.
Now, people get heart transplants all the time. So, this is a tough one to really parse.
Well, I mean, you can take it even more basic level. All four of us wear glasses. I mean, did God not get it right? I mean, is that why we can't see right anymore?
Yeah,
without
that's
him?
right. No,
or did he
look,
give us a brain to figure it out? So
Right,
here's
right.
the question: is that to what extent, just because we can figure something out, Do we? Should we?
Right. I mean, Ben, now people can fire a laser into your eye so you don't have to wear glasses anymore.
Well, and this is getting back to what we just talked about with the Pope position on this. It's these two articles really do sort of dovetail, because we come to that point of, just because we can do something, is it morally right that we do that something? And that's always the question, and that you have to have in any good seminary has an ethics class in which you go through this process of figuring out how do you work through the greater good and all these other things that go on, and the individual ethic that's involved in that kind of a decision. This is a more advanced technique for I'm just going to use the word eugenics, of perfecting the race. That's a good point. And so we have to be, we've seen how that can go wrong. When you start thinking that Superman can come in and correct God's, kind of lousy work. Well, we saw where that went, and we fought a world war over that kind of thinking. And so we have to be it isn't like this is the first rodeo. We've had this rodeo, and we've seen the consequences of that. So we have to be so careful with this, because this concept that we can fix all the flaws, that we don't need God, that we can fix it, that mankind is capable of fixing this. This is sort of a biological Tower of Babel that we're building here, that we have the ability scientifically to fix, that science is the answer.
Well, it goes back to that quote I used from Oswald Chambers, that when we try to explain all natural things, because when we do that, we have command. It all goes around to self. And I brought up that quote from Isaiah 5:21. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes. I mean, there's this fixation that the more we can explain, the less we need God. But the problem is the compassion is lost. It becomes an intellectual issue. Right. But the love of the Samaritan bending down to the fellow who was robbed, that is lost, and that is what we must have all through, from every level on down.
What happens to a culture where you lose the least of these? I mean, that's really what we're talking about, isn't it? That the reaching to the least of these, that's the commandment, the imperfect, the ones that struggle, that have less. And how do we?
And you have to wonder, too, the people doing this. Are they doing this with empathy for this person who's sick, that their goal is, we want to make you well? Or are they saying, we want to see if we can do this?
Thanks for joining us here on Faith Matters.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.